Do the Tampa Bay Lightning have a few trades up their sleeves to become cap compliant? Will the New York Rangers actually be looking to sell off some assets as the season goes? And has Zdeno Chara played his last game as a Boston Bruins? There's a lot of rumors saying that the captain and the Bruins might be done with each other. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of teams to talk about here today. There's a lot of news and rumors from around the league. Before we jump into the rumor section of the video, a couple of quick notes. We do have another signing to quickly mention here. The Ottawa Senators have signed NHL veteran Michael Haley to a one-year, two-way contract. League minimum salary to NHL level as well. No big surprise. I was surprised, to be honest, on this signing for the Senators to bring Haley in. When I seen it was a two-way deal, it was a little bit better, but my only concern, I guess, is I'd hate to see them bring in a guy like Haley who can box out a young guy from getting a lot of ice time and development time at the NHL level, because they have a lot of kids that need more of an opportunity to play to really see what they're going to be at the NHL. So we're talking about guys like Drake Batherson or Logan Brown, not your brand new guys that were just drafted, but guys that have been in the system now for 2 or 3 years, and they need to have that time. And they did the same thing last year when they brought in Scott Sabourin. Unfortunately for Sabourin, he got hurt early on and missed a big chunk of the time, which was fortunate, I guess, for the other prospects getting more ice time. But still, I understand to have a veteran around who can play that tough style of game and be willing to drop the gloves if necessary, especially where Mark Borieski's not there anymore. But still, I mean, I would hope for the most part that he would be brought in mostly as a leader for the AHL team, which is what athletic writer Haley Salvian has mentioned, that she feels he'll be a mentor and leader for the farm team. So if that's the case, good signing, good veteran guy to bring in for that. But I just hope for the young guy's sake in the Senators organization that he doesn't box out somebody at the NHL level, because to me that just is not a good idea at all. Now, on another contract note here, there is word that the Washington Capitals and Alexander Ovechkin have called off contract negotiations, at least for the time being. We know that Alex Ovechkin's entering the final year of his contract, and we've heard reports before that Ovechkin would love to stay in Washington, sign probably one more contract for 3 to 5 years, probably 4 or 5 would be the most likely scenario, and then likely retire as a Capital and then finish out his career in Russia. I mean, he himself in a recent interview said before it's all done, he's hoping his health holds up, that he can have another contract, another run in the NHL for a few years, but then go back to Moscow Dynamo and finish up there for at least one season. So obviously that's where he started as a pro many years ago. That's where he'd like to finish up. And the talks have been ongoing. There was reports when the offseason kind of first was getting in a high gear that they were offering him somewhere around $9 million on a 5-year deal. So 9 times 5 is $45 million. And it's believed that Ovechkin wanted more, closer to McDavid money is what was being reported at that time. So I think we're going to likely see probably a 5-year deal makes a lot of sense based on what he's saying for what he wants to play. But it's going to be a minimum of $45 million in my opinion. But they've agreed to not negotiate any longer until training camp gets underway. If everything goes well, training camp could be underway and maybe as little as about 4 weeks or so. Just kind of depends on where things go. But if everything happens the way that is being rumored around the NHL season, camps could be opening around middle of December. So they could pick things up here in another month. But obviously, I'm sure for the Capitals' sake, they probably don't want to drag this on too far, especially into the season, because a lot of players prefer not to negotiate in season. They find it very distracting, and they would just prefer to kind of focus on hockey. So we'll see. I'm sure they'll figure something out. But hearing that they called off negotiations for right now, I guess is mildly concerning, but still lots of time to get everything sorted. Now, as I mentioned, we want to take a look at a few other teams. We want to take a look at the Tampa Bay Lightning, the New York Rangers, and the Boston Bruins here today. I want to kick things off with the Rangers first up. And before we jump into the rumors about what might happen later on, there is also word out there that I've seen that Henrik Lundqvist may very well be planning to return to the Rangers after his time with the Capitals are up. So, for example, and I'm not talking here as a player, I mean when he's done playing, which could very well be a year or two. I'm not sure how long he'll remain in the NHL, but that it's pretty much already something that might be already have been discussed when he was on his way out of the Rangers organization to come back and work with them in a different capacity in the front office. So would not be surprising. Of course, he was a long-time New York Ranger, well-respected player, one of the better goaltenders they've had in a long time. So clearly, I'm sure they'd love to have him work with them in some capacity once he's done playing. So something to kind of look forward to in the future in that front. But the latest information I want to discuss on the Rangers comes from The Athletic and writer Rick Carpiniello, who's talking about the fact that he feels the New York Rangers will once again be sellers at this NHL trade deadline for the upcoming 2021 NHL season. Obviously, as we discussed throughout this offseason, they do have a few players especially that you have to question their long-term future. And even though they get contracts done up for all their RFAs and all that business appears to be pretty much done, I would expect the Rangers most likely do open the season with pretty well the roster that they have in place today. There could be some minor tinkering maybe, but at this point at least we're not expecting anything significant. Not to say it couldn't happen, but nothing that's really being rumored or expected. But for down the road, even though they got these players signed, Carpiniello does expect, especially a player like a Ryan Strome, very well could be their top trade chip at the deadline. Now, of course, I'm sure a lot of this is also going to depend on where the Rangers sit when it comes to the NHL playoffs. I mean, the NHL has made it known that they really don't care to have those expanded playoffs again like they did last year. It was a unique situation, a unique season, and if everything goes well this year, and whether or not they go with 48, 50, 62 games, it's pretty safe to say it's not going to be 82. It will be a lesser number, and obviously they want to get their playoffs done, like I said, by July or mid-July or so, before the Olympics start, before we get too deep into the summer. So either way, with all that said and done, I would think that the Rangers are going to be, in a unique situation where they could have a different division, different opponents. Things are going to be different this year for sure. And if they're not in a playoff situation, it totally makes sense for them to sell off more assets like they did before if they don't intend to see these players as part of their long-term plans. But Carpiniello mentioned specifically Ryan Strome, maybe even Tony DeAngelo as well, as being players that even though they were signed, they weren't signed long-term, they wouldn't have a ton of term left, so these players could be very attractive with a short amount of time on their contracts to be picked up here for NHL playoff runs by other teams. Now, if things go exceptionally well and the Rangers are sitting well positioned for the playoffs, then I would think that obviously they'll handle things a little bit differently, because obviously, especially some of these guys, if they're not on expiring contracts, they're not really at risk to lose them anyway. But at the end of the day, Strome as well as DeAngelo are the main ones, but you could also see some other players, including Brendan Smith, Jack Johnson, and to a degree Pavel Buchnevich as well. I mean, I'm sure they'd love to move Brendan Smith. I mean, he has been versatile and did bounce back, but still never really lived up to the contract that he signed when he was a free agent a number of years back. Jack Johnson's on a one-year contract, so obviously he could be there to kind of fill a gap, for the short term, and then be a piece that gets traded to gain another asset back in return. Even if it's only a third or fourth, fifth round pick, doesn't matter what it is, they get something in return. It gets him a year to kind of bounce back, gives them a stopgap, and then from there, allows them to get something in return. So we'll see what happens, but the Rangers, according to Carpiniello, very much expected to be sellers at the deadline, especially if they're not in the playoffs, and these are the main players that they likely do not see as part of the big-time future. Now, one thing I'll caution you about the DeAngelo talk is I wouldn't be totally shocked if they went a different direction. I think a lot of that's going to depend on how we see the play of Jacob Trouba. Now, his contract's more expensive, and I believe he has a form of no trade protection in there as well, which could complicate things, but still, Trouba hasn't really lived up to that contract, in my opinion, at least as of yet. If he has another down season, then I would not be shocked if they considered moving Trouba, if they were able to, that is, and hanging on to a guy like DeAngelo. But we'll have to see how the season plays out. But as of right now, DeAngelo is a player that I do not see, presently at least, being a long-term part of the solution in the Big Apple. Now, of course, as I mentioned as well, a lot of talk about Tampa, following up on yesterday's story that we discussed with the Lightning, obviously might be forced to trade some key players that they don't really want to, including their RFAs that they need to be signed, which include Anthony Cirelli, Mikhail Sergachev, and Erik Chernak. I think the Lightning are going to do their best to not sign these players until they find the cap space. As I talked about then as well, if they sign them and go over the cap, they're going to be forced to be, cap compliant by the season start. Whereas at this point, if they can wait, and then if they can't find a trade, as I said, they could be forced to not sign their RFAs. We'll kind of leave them hanging. That means they can't play, which obviously isn't good for the team. But there's more reports that they're apparently close to finding trades for Tyler Johnson and Yanni Gourde. Those are the two players that apparently are in the mix here that the Lightning appear to be having more discussions on, and something might be brewing to get them close to finding trades. If you take a look at their CapFriendly.com projections here, they have just shy of $3 million in space right now. I think it's like $2.89 million. And then if they find ways to move on from these players that's going to create another $10.16 million as well. So that's going to be just shy of $13 million, or right around $13 million in cap space that they have available. That would certainly be more than enough to take care of their restricted free agents. If you look at the history of the Tampa Bay Lightning that they've had when it comes to a lot of their top players, including most recently Braden Point, he signed a 3-year deal at $6.75. That's a very team-friendly contract. You had Nikita Kucherov before he got his long-term deal. He did a 3-year contract under $5 million. I mean, Stamkos was a little bit richer. It was like a 5-year deal. I think it's $7.5. Victor Hedman even had a shorter-term deal before he got his current contract as well. He was at 5 years and $4 million per season. So they seem to have this thing where they've been able to have really good success with players' second contracts. So I think they can find ways here, especially given the current market here of the NHL with all the lost revenue, and obviously things are different now between Sergachev and Cirelli, to get them on 2-3-year contracts, maybe 4 years at most, for a reasonable amount of money. And if they can find a way to move on these two players that's being rumored out there, then that gives them more than enough room to do that, and can kind of give them a small buffer here to boot. So we will see what happens if the rumors here on the Lightning come true, what they're apparently having discussions on right now. But if you look around the roster here of the Lightning, as I mentioned before, if they can't find a way to move some of these guys, then it's not going to be easy. They have certain means they can use to kind of work around. They already tried putting Tyler Johnson through waivers, and that did not work. The player was not picked up by another team. But essentially what they can do, if they have a team who's interested in acquiring one of these guys, but the player won't waive their no-trade clause, they can put the player through waivers. That team can claim them to get the player that way. Then they can strike another trade for like future considerations or something to that effect, so that they can kind of make a trade without making a trade, so to speak. It's a way to kind of work around it. Obviously, you know, you could have some other teams interfere with your plans here. There's no guarantee that the team you're talking to will be the only one to put a claim in, but at the same time, it is a way to work around those no-trade clauses. So I would not be surprised if we see a player like Johnson or Gord go through the waiver wire here, you know, sometime soon again, to give teams an opportunity. Because as we get closer and closer to having an announcement on the NHL season, they're not going to have a choice but to figure something out, and their hand's going to be forced here. But with all these no-trade clauses, like I said numerous times, they've kind of put themselves in this really bad situation, arguably the worst cap situation around the NHL right now. At this point, I don't have any information to suggest what teams they're talking to about Johnson and Gord, but according to a lot of NHL sources, these are the guys that the most discussions are on right now, and something could be getting close. Now, as I mentioned as well, there's also some information out there suggesting that the Boston Bruins and Zdeno Chara may not be getting back together for another kick at the can here. Obviously, Zdeno Chara has been their captain for a long time. Obviously, he was, started with the Islanders, played there briefly, went on to a lot of success with the Ottawa Senators. They chose to let him hit free agency. Obviously, they had to pick between he and Wade Redden, and in my opinion, they made the wrong choice. Chara hit free agency, signed with Boston, became their captain, and has been a tremendous leader and player there for many, many years now. And it looks as though the talk is that the Bruins are not really all that interested in bringing Chara back. And we have some Boston media suggesting that they have information to suggest that he won't be back, and that he's been linked to 3 of their teams. Now, we've talked about before about Chara being, possibly being linked to teams like Toronto, Tampa, and the New York Islanders, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around. It's really hard to see him in any jersey. But when you look at those 3 teams, when it comes to like Tampa and Toronto especially, I don't see how they could afford this guy. I mean, as much as he's likely not going to take a ton of money, and he probably would be a better fit in Toronto than Tampa. I mean, Tampa doesn't really need Zdeno Chara. They have a very deep team already. So clearly, I mean, yeah, I guess you could never really go wrong adding more depth and experience and character, leadership, but I don't really see how Tampa would really, be a great fit, why they'd want to spend the money there when they can't even get their own RFA sign. We just talked about Tampa, and it's surprising to hear Tampa linked to any team that would not involve a trade right now, because they desperately need to find cap space. And the Leafs' sake, they have so many defensemen there now. I mean, they already went out of their way to bring in several guys that on the blue line this year. They brought in TJ Brody, they brought in Zach Bogosian, I mean, they brought in Mikko Lehtinen from Europe. Like, they have a lot already back there. They have some young guys like Rasmus Sandin, Timothy Liljegren, they're trying to find ice time for. You still got Morgan Rielly, Jake Muzzin, Trevor Dermott, Justin Hall. I mean, to me, adding Chara into the mix, I mean, you can't go wrong in a sense that he's a great leader. He's going to teach them how to play defense probably. He'd be a great mentor, sure. But they don't really have the money to spend on him, and they don't really have the room in their lineup, so I don't understand how he's being linked to Tampa and Toronto. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, the Islanders do make the most sense, and they've been rumored to bring in a veteran guy, and they obviously have been also rumored to have a handshake agreement in place with a guy like Andy Green. Maybe they would bail on that and bring Chara instead. I don't know, but Chara would be a good fit given the Barry Trotz defensive style of game. It would be a good fit for him. But at the end of the day here, they still need to sign Matthew Barzal, and I don't see them going out to do that. Personally, I don't think Zdeno Chara is going to sign anywhere until we have the full details on the NHL season. A player of his age, he's kind of made it known that he really wants to see how everything's going to be structured this year before he makes a decision. He's made it known that he wants to play, yes, but depending on how many games, is it a bubble system, hybrid bubble, you're playing in home arenas, how's it all going to work? It seems like he really wants that information before he makes a decision here, and I still would not be surprised one bit if everything is announced and he still comes to terms on a cheap one-year contract with Boston. It's really hard to imagine him anywhere else, and at least right now, the teams that he's being linked to just, to me, don't make a lot of sense. So I guess only time will tell, and we will find out soon enough when Chara does indeed sign a contract somewheres with somebody. But to me, he's a Bruin, and I can see him coming back on a cheap contract. So let me know what your thoughts are on the situation between Chara and Boston. Do you think there's any truth to the rumors that they don't have interest to bring back their longtime NHL captain? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.